Good morning. It is 11:23. Really? Jeez. 11:23 a.m. on Sunday, December 23rd, 2018. I'm Christiana Ellis and I've been actually up for a little bit. This is 5 more minutes and it's Sunday, and because Extra Life was last week, I am resuming my rewatch of Gravity Falls with season 1, episode 7, Double Dipper. And this is a fun episode for sure. I think it takes some classic sort of sci-fi fantasy tropes, but does some interesting stuff with them. In particular, just the starting of to call out this trope of the clones all turning on each other, but at least briefly, they don't. They actually all work together, and it's really only when Dipper tries to diverge from the plan that the other Dippers turn on him, and I think that's slightly interesting take on it, especially given that the metaphor theme we're working with this week is that Dipper gets in his own way. So if you haven't seen the episode, or if you haven't watched it in a while, basic idea: Stan is throwing a big party at the Mystery Shack on the basis that he wants more kids to come and spend money. And so setting up a party with banners that say free question mark, people get in and then they have to pay $15 to leave. It's pretty funny. And so setting all of that up where Dipper is, we're continuing the subplot of Dipper's crush on Wendy, the tall red-haired girl who also works at the Mystery Shack, and he has a whole plan to try to impress her and get to dance with her. And when Mabel advises that he's getting in his own way and making things overcomplicated, but he's committed to the plan. But in the meantime, they discover there's a photocopier that can make copies of people. And so Dipper, in order to enact this complicated plan he has, needs help, and therefore makes copies of himself in order to help him. And at first they're all cooperating, but he keeps making it more and more and more complicated, and this is exacerbated by all the copies having the exact same instincts. But ultimately, at a certain point, Dipper finds that he does have an unplanned connection with Wendy, where he kind of bonds with her a little bit. Starts thinking maybe maybe Mabel was right, and I don't need the complicated plan. But that's, of course, when they turn on him. Clone fight, and Dipper learns the lesson even as he realizes he missed his opportunity to use the party to connect even further with Wendy. One of the things that is interesting, and obviously we're going to continue to see this storyline develop as we rewatch the series, but part of the reason, one of the things that a lot of these types of cartoons do when dealing with these unrequited crushes is there's this assumption that the lesson of you don't need to be overcomplicated, you just need to talk to her and be yourself, that sort of lesson can be good advice, but in real life, for sure, it needs to go along with the idea of, and she might still say no, and you have to be okay with that. Or you have to at least recognize that it is her right to say no if she's not interested. Because there might actually be nothing that he can do. She is older, and even though the episode establishes her as 15, I think we watching can't help but recognize she seems way more mature than him and not likely to be romantically interested in Dipper. And so that's the other piece of these stories, is that the classic cliche trope filled ones frequently treat it as the girl is the prize to be won, and the guy just has to figure out the right trick to getting her to love him. And of course, that's not always how it works. And I will go ahead and give this show credit. I mean, it's not as apparent in this early part, but Dipper does not get the girl at the end of this episode. What he recognizes is that he got closer than he's ever been to connecting with her, and then got in his own way, which is still probably a good lesson. And I'm not saying that this episode treats Wendy as the prize necessarily, so much as that that's the trope, and it is incumbent on this show to eventually get there. But at least so far, we still do have some of those classic, tropes of, oh, the girl actually is into the bad guy, the bad boy, and that sort of thing. But I don't want to complain about what other shows do with that kind of story so much as to say, right now, this one is early on in that plot thread. Kind of overcomplicated that, I think, by anticipating. See, that's sometimes the trick with a rewatch, is deciding how much to talk about stuff that happens later. And so if I don't want to talk about the stuff that happens later, sometimes that can interfere with my ability to talk about these things. But for sure, the lesson of getting out of your own way, not overcomplicating things, is probably a lesson that is useful for Dipper, and it's well told here to have, sometimes he gets in his own way, literally. In the meantime, we also have a nice subplot of introducing some characters to fill out Mabel's half of the show. She makes some new friends in Grenda and Candy, who immediately, I just love that, Mabel finds these girls who are kind of sitting by themselves, and, Grenda has the iguana. It's like, you have an animal on your person, and you have forks taped to your fingers. Why? And then, Candy uses the forks on her fingers to pick up popcorn, and she says, improvement of the human form. And Mabel's response to that is, of course, I found my people. And I think that's fantastic. And so it's nice to introduce some friends for Mabel. And they also introduce her sort of antagonist, in Pacifica Northwest, which is a great name for the rich mean girl character. And so, of course, we have the subplot for Mabel of, trying to be win the party crown. And, it's interesting, too, that Mabel really never gains any animosity towards Pacifica. She really doesn't seem to take any of Pacifica's stuff personally at all. And it is only her recognition that Grenda and Candy are perceiving that she decides, well, someone ought to stand up for our side. But she doesn't ever really take it personally with Pacifica, which is an interesting take, because I think, again, the more cliche way to handle it would have been, oh, we hate Pacifica, she's the worst, oh, we gotta take her down. But no, that's kind of not how Mabel rolls, she's like, oh, well, you know what, hey, I'll compete too. She's a little, she's sad to lose, but it doesn't ever turn, it's not ever mean-spirited from Mabel's side, which is, I think, kind of cool. But in the meantime, we also see that Pacifica only ends up winning the contest, not only by having to glower at people in order to get them to clap for her, but also literally paying Old Man McGucket to to clap for her as well. And it's also funny that Seuss's whole bit of the applausometer thing, but then looking dismayed at like, oh no, I have to follow the whims of the applausometer, meaning my own hand, that I've moved in a certain direction. So that's pretty fun. And just all the bits about Seuss's DJ are also pretty fun, like learning it from a book. And he's got his keyboard again. And then, of course, the classic bit of, the dot, hey, look over there, a glowing dot. And he turns and he's like, I'm so glad I looked over here. Does not disappoint. That's pretty fun. We don't have a lot from Stan other than the introduction of this party that people have to pay to leave, and then the bit later where Dipper, one of the Dipper clones dangles the money, and we get the moment from Stan of saying, right, like I'm gonna fall for that, and then kind of faints like he's getting more snacks, and then dives for it and chases it around the room. That's pretty fun. But so obviously the gags of Dipper making his copies are the A plot, and it's fun that all of the copies are slightly faded in their colors. That's a nice detail. It's also great that it's smart visual storytelling that Dipper is making the copy of himself laying on his back, so the copy doesn't have the front, and therefore his hat doesn't have the symbol, and then they can write the number there. That's just a great idea for us to be able to distinguish the clones from one another. That's good stuff. I also like the idea of the clones not immediately getting jealous, and ultimately they only turn on him in a way that kind of reinforces anxiety issues and some of the tendencies that people can have to overcomplicate things and self-sabotage, because they don't turn on him until it starts seeming like it's going well without the plan. And I think people who suffer from anxiety and other issues like that can definitely recognize that it's one thing to be nervous about real problems. I mean, that's reasonable, right? That's rational to say, if I have a real problem, I need to worry about it, think how to solve it, figure out a solution, and then the problem's solved. Like, that's the whole idea of that emotion. Like, that's what it's supposed to do. But an anxiety issue tends to crop up when you don't really need it. And that's the problem, right? And so when it starts going well, that's when those mental patterns of like, well, but what if, but we're not following the plan. So clearly that means that it's all terrible. And so then that's when it all falls together. And I just feel like it's a neat little metaphor for that. Plus we get, clone fight, stop hitting myself. Hey guys, if we were locked in a closet, what would we do? Break out, and then they look and he's already broken out, which is pretty great. Nice visual bit of Dipper angrily eating handy snacks, this little cheese and crackers thing. So lots of good stuff. The whole bit about Paper Jam Dipper, the idea that there's apparently a peach flavored soda called Pit, which I like, and that's what they use to melt the various clones, and all of that's good stuff. I like it a lot, and I think this is a fun episode. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. I think that's, I remember. I found on the wiki the full text of Dipper's plan, which is difficult to read in the context of the episode because it's kind of there and gone so quickly, but the plan in its entirety, according to this wiki: Step 1, smile. Step 2, wear clean pants. Step 3, compliment her looks. Step 4, laugh at her jokes. Step 5, be nice. Step 6, block Robbie. Step 7, wear fitted clothing. Step 8, wear a tie. Step 9, talk to her like a normal person. Step 10, describe how she smells. Step 11, make her laugh. Step 12, agree with everything she says. Step 13, pretend you're fun. Step 14, pretend you're confident. Step 15, mop up sweat in private, in parentheses. Step 16, lose burrito smell. Step 17, pretend to read smart books. Step 18, use deodorant everywhere. Step 19, display Monstermon knowledge, presumably like Pokemon, I guess. And then step 20, do not display Monstermon knowledge. So that's pretty fun. I like so there's some fun stuff in this episode, and I think that it's a solid episode, and it continues this through line of Dipper and Wendy, which I think, as I kind of indicated earlier, if you have not watched, I like how all that resolves as we get there. But in the meantime, this is a fun episode on its own. And so next week, I will be back in Korea, but I will be talking about episode 8, Irrational Treasure. All right. In the meantime, I'll talk to you tomorrow for 5 more minutes.